It began on the courthouse steps. A 15-year-old girl stood alone, her face streaked with tears and bruises that told a story no one inside wanted to hear. Strangers in expensive suits brushed past her as if she didn't exist. Her foster mother, who should have stood by her side, had been pulled from the road by squad cars and taken away on false charges. And inside the courtroom, her father, a decorated police sergeant, was convincing a judge that every word of abuse was nothing but a lie. The system was rigged. The girl had no lawyer, no protection, and no one left to speak for her. But one man, a biker paying a simple traffic ticket, heard her desperate cries for help. With a single text message, the sound of motorcycles began to build in the distance. Within minutes, leather-clad riders from rival clubs, men who hadn't stood in the same room for years, rolled toward the courthouse, united by one terrified teenager. What began as a cry for help was about to become a standoff between a powerful cop and an army of outlaws who lived by a different code. 47 bikers dismounted and walked into the courthouse together. What the girl didn't know yet was that the very people the world told her to fear were about to become her shield. Inside the courtroom, the air shifted. What began as intimidation became illumination. The mask of a decorated officer started to crack, not with shouting, but with evidence, quiet, stubborn, undeniable. A flash drive on a wooden table threatened to overturn every comfortable lie the room had learned to believe. The girl, no longer a whisper, became a voice. Years of bruises and missing records were no longer scattered facts. They were a pattern the court could finally see. The bikers didn't roar or posture, they witnessed. In a place where fear had been currency, presence became protection. The judge looked beyond the uniform, beyond the reputation, beyond the choreography of a system that too often silenced the smallest person in the room. And when the gavel fell, it didn't just settle an argument. It drew a line. Parental rights ended. Investigations began. The cycle, interference, harassment, retaliation, met a barrier it could not push past. Consequences arrived the way truth often does, not dramatic but definitive. Handcuffs, paperwork, and the long walk that follows a closed door. Outside, engines hummed like a promise kept. Inside, a child realized that being believed is louder than any threat. That night, the story outgrew the building that contained it. A hashtag became a highway, a timeline filled with strangers who refused to be strangers anymore. Donations didn't just stack into numbers. They built a future with a name on it. In different states, people in suits started asking new questions about old habits. Somewhere between outrage and resolve, reform found an opening. Weeks turned into miles. The girl learned balance, first on a bike, then in her life. The patch on her jacket wasn't decoration. It was a vow stitched by people who understood that protection is a verb. 2 years later, she rode back to the place where she once stood alone, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The man who hid behind a badge now faced a number that didn't care about his rank. The child he tried to bury in paperwork founded something bigger than his shadow. Riders organized with purpose, routes mapped to shelters and court dates, engines timed to the quiet hours when fear likes to speak the loudest. This is how strength changes shape, not by being the loudest, but by showing up, again and again. In the end, the scariest-looking people weren't the danger. They were the buffer between danger and a door, and the girl who once begged into a phone discovered a different definition of safety, one built not on image but on action, because protection isn't a headline. It's a habit, and when habits take the road together, they don't just escort a child to court, they escort a community toward the person it's supposed to be. The courthouse was a place of whispers and paperwork, not thunder. But that day, the sound on the horizon was unmistakable. Engines, heavy, unbroken, and growing louder with every second. A message sent by one man had turned into a call answered by dozens. In less than 20 minutes, the street outside transformed. Riders who had once been enemies now stood side by side, their only allegiance bound by the safety of a child. Iron Guardians, veterans of steel, Christian riders. Clubs that rarely shared the same stretch of highway now shared a single purpose. One by one, they dismounted. Boots struck pavement in rhythm, echoing like a drumline of defiance. 47 men in leather jackets crossed the street and climbed those courthouse steps. Each face weathered, each presence a statement. She would not be invisible today. Inside, the usual hierarchy cracked. The judge, accustomed to swift rulings, glanced up and faltered. The decorated sergeant's confident mask began to slip, his courtroom advantage shrinking with every jacket that filled the benches. For the first time, the girl wasn't facing him alone. The system tried to push back. A bailiff at the door muttered the rules. Family only. But rules meant little when survival was on the line. To the bikers, family wasn't written in bloodlines. It was carved in loyalty, and loyalty had answered the call. The tension thickened as the hearing began. The girl had no lawyer. Her foster mother was missing. Across the aisle, her father's attorney smiled, knowing how easily silence could win a case. But the silence was different now. It wasn't absence, it was pressure, held in place by dozens of witnesses refusing to look away. For every accusation her father's lawyer made, a presence in the room countered it, not with words, but with the undeniable fact that truth had finally brought an audience. And when the bikers began naming the complaints and the calls, the illusion of a spotless badge grew thinner with each count. The gavel struck harder, the judge shouting for order. But the balance had already shifted. In a room where the child had been abandoned by her defenders, strangers had chosen to stay. And just when it seemed the tide might still drown her, the doors opened again. A new figure stepped inside, not in leather, but in a sharp suit carrying a folder thick with the evidence that had once disappeared. She wasn't a biker, but she carried the same code: protection. The girl's voice, once trembling, began to cut through the courtroom like a blade. For years she had been silenced, punished, and threatened. Now every memory she revealed chipped away at the decorated image her father had built. The words poured out faster than the gavel could strike, and for the first time, the truth felt louder than the lies. But truth has a way of provoking fury. The sergeant, red-faced and trembling, snapped. He surged forward, not toward the bench, not toward the bikers, but toward his daughter. It happened in an instant. The very danger she had always feared coming alive in front of everyone. He didn't make it far. The tap of a cane swept his legs out from under him, and the decorated officer crashed to the floor. Around him, 5 men stood like shadows, present, immovable, unyielding. They didn't raise a hand. They didn't need to. Their silence was heavier than any fist. The sergeant shouted for their arrest, spitting rage at anyone who would listen. But the bikers, every single one of them, spoke in one voice. He had simply tripped. For once, the power of numbers was on her side. The judge's gavel struck again, his patience fraying. Eyes turned to the woman with the folder, the only one in the room who had yet to reveal her final move. Slowly, she slid a flash drive across the table, her calm cutting deeper than any outburst. Inside that tiny piece of plastic lived recordings no one was meant to hear. Threats, confessions, proof. The judge leaned forward. The sergeant froze. The bikers waited, and the girl, clutching the edge of the table, held her breath. Because when that drive